and how we pulled it off. And the party was, basically an EDM concert with some very interesting performers. We had Please and Thank You. We had Alesso as the headline performer. We had Matthew Bentley. So it was very interesting. And as part of it, we also launched a couple of things. We had one, an experimental experience by Carsten Hohler called Seven Herds. So that was an interesting experience as well. And we also sort of made a hat tip to the Beeple 5000 because that kind of started all of it. So the only version of the Beeple 5000 that we've seen so far is that collage, right? Which is frankly kind of overwhelming and very underserved in terms of detail. So we had like a 2.5 minute video where it zoomed in and out of key elements, which sort of traced Beetle's own journey through some of the motifs that he used in these works of art. So this was Dreamers. It was an experiment in experiencing NFTs in the physical world.
So is this going to be an annual event? Do you think that it will continue to coincide with NFT NYC, or do you think it would be something that will take place more frequently, will move around the world? What do you think? What's the future of Dreamverse?
It's definitely going to be an annual event. I'm not entirely sure it might always sort of tail NFT NYC. Maybe it might tail DevCon. I don't know, or something. But it most definitely will be an annual event. And I also foresee it having a lot of satellite events sort of spread throughout the year because, it just feels like it. I think we ought to have smaller pockets and experiments of Dreamverse itself, which all culminate into this big annual event in New York. That's kind of how I see it in my head. But it's some version of it or versions of it will definitely happen every year.
So, in your opinion, what makes a good piece of crypto art? What do you think?
It's interesting. Okay. Um, yeah, I think it's the same as asking what makes a good piece of art, right? It's whatever moves you, whatever speaks to you is good art. It's as simple as that. I mean, if you're asking me from the perspective of an investor, I wouldn't be able to tell you because of Metakovan, thanks to him, I've had the privilege of never looking at art as an investment, but rather as a vehicle for a story, as a vehicle for an intention in the space, and that's how I will always continue to look at it. So even the way we've collected art over time has I think evolved. You add layers of context, both historical and about the artists themselves, to your own experience of being able to buy art. In many ways, I sort of regret having lost that initial freshness, maybe of being completely overwhelmed and of not knowing what I'm looking at. I don't think I will ever regain that feeling. But on the other hand, I'm immensely grateful for the relationships that I've formed with artists, which I think is unique to the NFT space. Like you can actually have a dialogue with the artist. And I think to sum it up, a good piece of crypto art is your ability to the ability of of connection, of you being able to connect with the work of art, and then being able to extend that connection to the artist also. To be able to complete that loop is what makes a work of art like truly good.
Sure. So do you feel like you have sensed a change in your taste over the last, say, year and a half? As you've looked at more and more work, do you feel like your taste is refined, or what do you think?
I wouldn't. Yeah, it definitely has changed. I wouldn't use the word defined, essentially, but it has evolved into something, and it continues to. I just hope, for the better, in a sense. But yes, it definitely has changed.
So, what do you see in store for the future of the NFT space? What do you think's on the horizon?
Oh, so much, so much. I mean, there is a larger vision, and I think uh, it will address the collective good eventually, but it's going to be incremental. It's going to be over a period of time. Now, I'm speaking of this in abstract and not specifically in terms of projects that are out there, because I think that's important as well. Because there are very powerful forces, very powerful trends that that people tend to FOMO over, and it's very difficult not to feel that feeling of FOMO, right? But I think they will give way to initiatives and ideas and projects that have a much more long-term vision, even within the NFT space. And it's hard to do that because in a space that changes and evolves so quickly, to come up with an idea or a concept that can sort of subsume any current trend that so happens to come about and sort of hold its own is rare. And I think projects of that sort, which are determinedly decentralized, which are determinedly long term in their vision, which have a certain percentage of ambiguity in how they will unfold, which don't necessarily fill a vacuum that exists right now, but address a sort of a necessity which will arise a year from now or two, will be very interesting. And I think that's what the NFT space has in store for us. I also think there will be a larger realization of the actual potential of NFTs in being time capsules and vehicles for culture, and as the probably the best archival tools that ever existed in human history, which haven't happened yet. And the third aspect that I see unfolding in front of us is this idea of collectively experiencing NFTs in interesting and different ways. Dreamverse is just the beginning of it, right? So people know that you can experience a work of art on massive screens, that you can experience it collectively, that you can look at it on you can make a spectacle out of it, you can make it immersive, and you can do it in a physical space. So there's going to be a lot more of that also, I think.
And so, what about roadblocks? What hurdles do you think will need to be overcome for the space to reach its full potential?
I don't see any roadblocks as such, Greg, to be honest. It's just that everything has a certain cycle time, right? Everything has a time to unfold. I mean, there are a variety of factors involved, of course. I mean, some of them are the speed at which the technology itself grows. For instance, I mean, the first time I think people spoke about scaling on Ethereum was in 2017. The first time I heard it, anyway, it was a massive discussion at Token Summit in 2017. And the feeling and the mood at the time was scaling was imminent. It could arrive any day over the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and we're still waiting for it. So sometimes technology doesn't catch up with the enthusiasm of the collective. Some of the roadblocks might be regulatory, but I think if you really think about it and open your eyes to what's in front of you, it's a matter of time. There are no real roadblocks as such, but just it's all part of the process.
And so, Twobadour, I really appreciate your time. If my listeners wanted to follow your work there at Metapurse, support your work, how's the best way for them to keep track?
Well, we're always available on Twitter at Metaverse at Twobadour, but we are still getting better at trying to talk about ourselves. So if you are looking for a place where you can find where you want to find our story, where you want to discover our story, it really doesn't exist. I can't point you to a single resource. Maybe this podcast is an excellent place to start.
Sure.
But that's something that will happen over a period of time. But if you want to follow what we're doing, feel free to follow Metaverse. Feel free to subscribe to our Substack, which is a good set of blogs, which you'll find interesting. We do a weekly sort of Twitter Spaces or a Clubhouse thing called NFT Radio, which we want to sort of amp up over a period of time. That's interesting. And if you look at the archives on NFT Radio, especially post the Beeple sale, you can find some of the most amazing conversations with the smartest people in the NFT space, really. So those are all interesting resources I can point you to.
Well, Twobadour, I can't wait, a year or two down the line when I have fractional ownership in an Alfredo jar NFT that you somehow bring.
Amen, Greg. Amen.
All right. Well, I tell you what, I again really appreciate your time and your willingness to be open and transparent and enlightening about where you guys have come from and the vision of decoloniality and a new world out there ahead of us. And so I really appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, Greg. This was a pleasure. I'm glad we ran into each other at NFT NYC.
Absolutely. Me too. Now, the news. April 15th, 2019. What could be worse than having to file your taxes? How about having to file your taxes while watching live footage from Paris of a massive fire laying waste to the Cathedral Notre Dame? The iconic French Gothic structure has been at the center of Paris's identity for 800 years and is currently in the middle of a massive restoration project that will replace huge sections of the structure that were destroyed by the fire. Most catastrophic of the damage were the enormous wooden beams that held up the church's roof and supported the massive lead-coated spire that towered 315 feet above Paris. Architects are taking great care to reconstruct these areas using period-correct materials and techniques. To do so, France went hunting for tall, straight, sturdy trees. They found their trees in France's Forêt de Berce. France began harvesting 1,000 of these massive 230-year-old oaks in March of this year, some of which will be capable of making beams as long as 60 feet. The trees are all currently in an 18-month drying process necessary before they can be cut into beams. Meanwhile, plans are being made that would reimagine the interior of the cathedral, plans that are garnering a fair amount of criticism. Some critics are even comparing the proposed changes to something Disney would dream up, and in case you're wondering, that's not a compliment. The art newspaper recently published an article that provided a succinct description of what has people at odds. And I'll read you a segment. Although the project has not been formally announced, Father Gilles Drouin provided an overview during an online conference in May for the General Secretariat of Catholic Education in France, which has been posted on YouTube. Last Friday, the British conservative newspaper The Telegraph denounced the reimagined Notre Dame as a politically correct Disneyland and an experimental showroom. Father Drouin, the director of the Liturgical Institute of Paris, said during the presentation that he was chosen 2 years ago by the Archbishop of Paris, Michael Alpetit, to revamp the inner space of the cathedral. He proposes a sound and light trail along the side chapels, providing a fruitful dialogue with contemporary art. He plans to replace the straw chairs, which occupy 80% of the space, with luminous mobile benches. Most of these could be removed during weekdays to leave more room for visitors. Altars in the chapel would also be displaced, and only 4 confessionals maintained on the ground floor. Drouin explained that Notre Dame was not adapted to cope with large numbers of tourists, which rose to 12 million before the cathedral was devastated by fire in 2019. Visitors come for different reasons, most of them from non-Christian or post-Christian cultures. So the chapels, some of which could be